So, in my review of the new Grinch movie, which I will link in the description below, I've always wanted to do that, I talked about how shocked I was to find out that people do not hold the Jim Carrey version to the same high regard that I do. Because I love it, unironically. I think that it is one of the best movies to ever exist. But I know that people are going to like and or dislike whatever it is that they want to, and in the case of this movie, if they don't like it, then they are of course entitled to their wrong opinion. And so I was going to leave it at that. But then I came across a new Carson Runquist video where he said this.
These movies all span across different levels of mediocrity. I don't want to see any of you f***s coming in here like, oh, but the live action Grinch was my childhood. The live action Grinch isn't worth defending, alright? Leave it alone, accept it.
The audacity!
Now, I generally respect Mr. Ronquist's opinions. You know, I myself agree that Robots is one of the more underappreciated gems to come out of the 2000s. But this is taking it too far. Now, I was already ready to go in. But then I wanted to do some extra research because while I have my own thoughts and opinions and experiences with this movie, and honestly anything in general, I still like to do a bit of research just to see if there's anything else that I can find that'll, either help to make my thoughts a bit more clearer or, just put me onto some new information. And when I started doing some research about this Jim Carrey movie, I came across this. And this. And that's when I knew that I had entered the Twilight Zone. It's one thing to say that the Jim Carrey version is not good, but it is a whole other thing to then even suggest that this new Benedict Cumberbatch version is better than the Jim Carrey version. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I knew the world had gone mad, but I didn't know that it went Benedict Cumberbatch version greater than sign Jim Carrey version. Like, that's a world that I don't want to be a part of. I don't. And so I'm here to defend Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas starring Jim Carrey because not only is It's My Childhood a valid reason, but also because it's just a really great movie that at the very least deserves some respect. So let's get into it. Now, one of the biggest criticisms and or complaints that I see about the Jim Carrey version is the length. The length. Or how expanding on an already simplified and short story by adding in all of these extra story elements like, say, motivations for certain characters basically takes away from the essence of the Dr. Seuss story. And while I can't understand that, right, the stories themselves are already great as is, right? They're already so unique and so distinct that to break away from what it is that made it so special seems a bit unnecessary and maybe at times may seem like a slap in the face to Dr. Seuss. But we already know that these stories are simple and that they are short. And so if these stories are actually going to be turned into longer feature-length films, then some stuff is going to have to be added. They're not going to show a 30-minute cartoon in theaters today. It's just not going to happen. So it is going to have to be made longer. Now, of course, this then gets into the argument about how the very existence of these movies goes against Dr. Seuss's own wishes, and that is a problem in and of itself, but it's been done and it continues to be done, so at this point, it just kind of is what it is. And so, yeah, I don't subscribe to that thinking that by elongating any kind of Dr. Seuss movie that it automatically takes away from the value of the movie, because I do think that it can be done. If you find the right person that actually understands who Dr. Seuss was and what it was that made him and his story so special, then it can actually work. But with all of that being said, now I can't speak for these other Dr. Seuss movies, but I do not personally think that this Jim Carrey version of The Grinch is too long or too boring even for kids. I myself have seen longer and more boring movies that are geared toward kids, and I know that you all have done that as well. And even if that wasn't the case, I know that we were all kids at some point that watched movies that weren't even geared toward us, and we still like them. And so to say that this movie is too long or too boring for kids essentially negates the fact that we were kids and we've been exposed to a lot more or a lot worse, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, of course, there are moments in this Jim Carrey version that are slower and does kind of affect the pace of the movie, but the movie also gave us some iconic ass scenes like this.
Kids today, so desensitized by movies and television.
And this.
Well, That worked out nicely.
So I don't know. I guess you just got to take the good with the bad. Now, another thing that I really love about this movie is its visual look. I think that it's great. It's filled with a lot of childlike wonder. It's highly stylized. It's otherworldly. It's great. Now, yes, it is a bit darker and more edgy, but honestly, if you look at other versions of The Grinch, they all have darker tones to them, whether it be the actual animation or the actual drawings or colors that were used. I mean, remember, The Grinch wasn't always this bright green character. In the book, he was black and white and had pink eyes. I'm sure that you all wouldn't want that staring at you when you wake up in the middle of the night. He wasn't always meant to be this appealing looking thing. And so I don't think that by making the movie edgy or more darker that it devalues the movie. If anything, I look at it as being like a cool take on the original story. When it comes to the set design, I thought that all of that was really well done. I mean, getting to look at the ins and outs of Whoville and then looking at the Grinch's lair and how it was made out of junk, because as we all know, he lives in Mount Crumpet and that is where all of the Who's junk goes. I thought that that was really clever and well thought through. I love the use of practical effects. I could only imagine the amount of CGI that would be put in this movie if it was made now. And then also the makeup and the costumes. I mean, they had liquid in their hats. Liquid in their hats. Like, that's a small detail that you wouldn't really expect to see. It sounds crazy, but it works in this Whoville world. Now, yes, you could say that the look or the feel of the movie, or even the characters, more specifically the Grinch, is a bit nightmare-inducing. I mean, I myself do remember that when we first saw what Jim Carrey was going to look like as the Grinch, I do remember being a bit taken aback by it. Like, it was like a shock to my senses at that point in time. But the Grinch is meant to be repulsive and the Grinch is meant to be ugly. He's the Grinch. Like I already said, he's not supposed to be appealing to the eye. Could they have toned it down a bit? Sure, but I mean, I look at it as an artistic choice and I don't mind it. In fact, I've grown to love it, and it's the thing that really distinguishes it from any other movie that you've ever seen. And I actually think that this is one of the best ways in which this movie pays homage to Dr. Seuss, if we're keeping it a stack. And so when it comes to the writing, yes, a lot of it is more adult, and as we all know, adult doesn't necessarily align with the Dr. Seuss brand. And so that, of course, does take away from its universal appeal, because, a lot of the writing and or comedy is referential, or, you have to be a certain age to really understand some of the jokes.
It's because I'm green, isn't it?
I still think the writing is pretty good in this movie.
Nice kid. Bad judge of character.
They say that the Grinch story is meant to be about loud noise and gluttony and the glory of generosity and the criticizing of the value of commercialization and condemning of greed. And I can say that that is what this movie is about. The Grinch is constantly complaining about how the Who's are too loud.
Yes, this Christmas music must drown them out.
He is constantly indulging himself, as are the Who's. Cindy Lou Who is actually trying to bring some love and sense of purpose into the Grinch's life.
Mr. Grinch, I came to invite you to be holiday cheermeister.
And the Grinch and Cindy Lou Who are constantly reading the other Who's for filth because they are so into stuff.
I want golf clubs, I want diamonds, I want a pony so I can ride it twice, get bored, and sell it to make glue.
Doesn't this seem superfluous?
So what if some extra stuff gets added to the movie? I actually believe that, those things are what makes this movie so distinct and what makes it stand out to me as being one of the best movies ever. And so it sucks that I'm sitting here having to say this, but alas, we're here, so it is what it is. When it comes to the comedy, now, I am someone that loves a good comedy. I love to laugh, and so if I'm ever watching something that makes me laugh, or if I see a well-crafted joke, then that piece of work already has points in my book. And this movie gets so many points from me because the comedy is just great. This movie is funny. It has so many quotable lines.
Bleeding hearts of the world unite. Loathe entirely.
Holiday hoopy whatty?
So many memorable scenes.
I'm an idiot. You're an idiot.
But even when it comes to the funny, it's a smart kind of funny.
And this time, I'll keep it all.
You know, I feel like a lot of times when it comes to comedies today, a lot of them try to be meta and a lot of them try to be subversive. And I feel like there are times when it just falls flat. But to me, the comedy in this movie and the jokes are well earned. Yes, it is more adult and it's more crude and it's more edgy. And again, it's not necessarily in line with the Dr. Seuss brand.
Hello, Walter.
But I actually think that it's one of the saving graces of the movie. The comedy is just great.
It's not a dress, it's a kilt. Sicko.
And then on top of that, for the comedy to then be done by one of the greatest comedians of our generation, and dare I say to ever exist, because I do think that the argument can be made, just saying. I mean, it's like, it's the cherry on top. Like, what more evidence do you need that this is a dope ass movie that deserves some respect? Now, I already said it in my review of the other Grinch movie, but even if you don't care for this movie, what you cannot say is that Jim Carrey did not hit that role out of the park. Yes, it is Jim Carrey kind of humor, but so what? You know, he really did the damn thing. I mean, from the fact that he was improvising most of his lines,
6:30, dinner with me. I can't cancel that again.
to the fact that he was dealing with his own demons while he was shooting this movie, and then on top of that, had to have a CIA agent come in and train him in torture-resistant techniques, because being in that Grinch suit was so confining and so restricting. To know that he was going through all of this while working on the movie and still gave us what he gave us, it just makes me appreciate him in this role so much more. And so I don't know about y'all, but we love Jim Carrey over here, okay? That's something that you cannot and will not take away from this movie. I think that truthfully, everything that I've said up until this point can be debated. I may not agree with you, but it can be debated.
Really?
No.
But this, Jim Carrey in this role, no. Nope. No. 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 Not gonna happen. So I think that where a lot of the opposition from people is coming from when they say that they don't like this movie is the fact that they believe that this movie had to have been a strict adaptation of the book. And I don't necessarily see it that way. I see this movie more so as being a rightful and genuine interpretation on the source material, all in the name of art. This movie is a classic. Okay, it is. You can debate your dead goldfish on that, because I don't want to hear it. Okay, Ron Howard didn't necessarily have to stay 100% true to the source material in order for this movie to still have value. His interpretation and take on this movie is his to make. You may not like it, but it's still his right. Yes, it's darker and it's edgy and it's more adult, but like I said, it's those things that distinguish it from the source material that I believe make the movie so great. And so I thought that I would go ahead and end this movie making my own proclamation. While I love the other versions, the Jim Carrey version is the best version. And that is a hill that I would gladly die on.
And if you're the whose I hope you are, you will too.
She's right.